Can we welcome Chris? Move.
And that's forward and that's back.
Oh, well, hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Tim, for inviting me along to the Bavard Bar. It's a delight, and I'm very happy to be here. There's a very slight warning before this I'm going to be talking about Tintin, and there are some slides in here that contain some slightly dubious, some might say racist stereotypes, and also some scenes of the slaughtering of animals, albeit in cartoon form and cartoons from the 1930s, but I just thought I'd warn you. Right, so we're going to be talking about the politics of Tintin. And when I mentioned to people that I was going to be giving a talk about the politics of Tintin, the main reaction that I got, at least from people who've heard of Tintin, hands up who's heard of Tintin? Look, brilliant, and hands up who's read a Tintin book at some point in their life. That's good. Some of you haven't, and I'm really sorry, but the next 15 minutes are all about some books that you haven't read. But the main reaction I received from people who had read Tintin is what they said, oh, all that dodgy right-wing hyper-Catholic Belgian colonialist stuff. Which in some ways is true, at least for Tintin's earlier adventures, but in the oft-repeated phrase of someone who's about to talk to you about a subject for the next 15 minutes, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So here we have, this is a very, very recent picture, and this actually comes from, as Tim mentioned earlier, the World Cup. This was the semi-final between France and Belgium, and then we have representing France, we have Asterix, and representing Belgium, we have Tintin. And it's interesting because obviously France won, but in terms of cartoons, they didn't. Tintin is the best-selling Western comic, who's not a superhero. Some people argue that Tintin is a superhero given his death-dying ability to escape from things, but that's not really what I'm going to talk about. It's a completely separate talk that I haven't written. But I'm going to be talking to you about Tintin and the politics of Tintin and how we get from this Tintin here beating a communist within an inch of his life to this Tintin organising a bloodless coup in a fictitious South American country. How we get from the imperialist Tintin here teaches some Congolese children about the wonders of their country, Belgium, to this Tintin fighting for the rights of the downtrodden. How we get from Tintin, the big game hunter, to the Tintin who befriends elephants and learns to speak their language. And in order to do this, we need to look at the lives of two famous Belgians, Tintin and Georges Remy, the man who created him. Here he is, there's Georges Remy reading a Tintin book. Georges Remy, or Herge, which is his initials backwards in French, started his career as a Catholic, a conservative, and a cartoonist. He started out drawing for a magazine called La 20e Siècle, which is a conservative Catholic newspaper that existed in Belgium, and he created Tintin on his editor's request as a way of spreading propaganda. The boy reporter who goes to foreign countries and reports back to the audience at home, who are Belgian children. Now, the first three adventures of Tintin did just that. We first encountered Tintin in the land of the Soviets, where he's not only a shadow of what he formally comes to look like, but it's essentially just pure propaganda. He takes on communism and wins, and next up, he sets off to the Congo, where Herge could sing the praises of Belgium's colonial disaster. The story not only includes terrible, terrible racism, but also, just to add to the mix, gratuitous animal slaughter. Tintin kills an entire herd of gazelles. Not only that, he blows up a rhinoceros by drilling a hole in the rhinoceros, planting an explosive within, and then setting it off. And possibly in the most disturbing scene in all 24 Tintin books, he kills a monkey and wears its skin as a suit. Not content with this, he then sets off to America to clean up crime-ridden Chicago, where Al Capone has the dubious honour of being the only real person ever to appear in a Tintin story. Now, this is sort of the embryonic period of Tintin. They don't really have any sort of plot to it. It's mostly Tintin having wild escapades, getting out of trouble, and spreading propaganda. But Herge's stories become increasingly popular after this. And upon discovering that he was going to set his next story in China, a Chinese Catholic chaplain writes to Herge, saying that his students loved the Tintin stories and would be very disappointed if when Tintin goes to China, the Chinese were subject to the same gross stereotypes as had befallen the Russians and the Congolese. Herge went out and went to China and befriended a student of the chaplain called Zhang Chongren, who taught him calligraphy, and he basically encouraged a more understanding approach to other nationalities. Chang is actually immortalised in The Blue Lotus as Chang, Tintin's friend, and this scene here, they laugh at each other's absurd stereotypes of each other's cultures. With learning calligraphy, the two important things happen when he meets Chang. He learns how to draw, and he realises that if he's going to carry on doing these stories, they're going to need some form of plot. The early stories just see Tintin running around with a series of random escapades against blank coloured backgrounds. These two stories immediately follow each other. This is Tintin in America, which is the standard thing at the moment. He's running around, you've got basically lines, white walls, nothing really going on. This is the very next story, and you'll see he's not only is he studied the scenery that you might find in China, but there's so much more detail to it. It also takes a semi-coherent plot. One big and very important thing that also happened at this time is that the Second World War broke out. Living as he did in occupied Belgium, Herge continued to publish cartoons in the collaborationist magazine Le Soir, which is not really the best step if you're trying to shake off your reputation as a right-wing propagandist. But ironically, it's the success of the Tintin stories that meant that Herge moved in more cosmopolitan circles and learned that politics was a little bit more nuanced than these crude stereotypes he'd previously espoused. Now, what's interesting about the Tintin stories is that he redraws them. You saw the picture earlier of Tintin talking about the Red Paradise. He draws them again and again. They change from the black and white strips from the newspapers to the full-colour albums you see today. And he removed some of the more unsavoury elements. The exploding rhino doesn't appear in later issues, whilst the classroom scene... hello. That's not in the right place, that slide. We'll come back to that in a moment. The classroom scene, where it starts off, he's teaching about the wonders of Belgium. In later editions, he's just teaching them maths. You've obviously still got the terrible racial stereotypes, but at least the subject matter's a little bit more palatable. Now, this redrawing often produces some odd results, and there's a remarkable scene. The thing is, with a lot of Tintin books, you don't necessarily read them chronologically, you just pick up an album and read it. But when you do read them chronologically, you get this bizarre scene. Tintin has been captured. This is Cigars of the Pharaoh. And the person who's captured him recognises him. He's got one of Tintin's books. But the trouble is, the book he's holding is something that chronologically hasn't happened yet, which must be an astonishing experience for Tintin. Here he's got Destination Moon there. Tintin is not going to go to the moon for another 10 books yet. He's literally been shown his own future. Earlier in the same story, Snowy is talking about Marlinspike Hall, again somewhere that they won't discover for another 12 books. Must be quite an unsettling experience. Whilst his previous stories have all been set in real countries, Russia, the Congo, China, etc., his wartime stories avoided contemporary politics and are set in fictitious countries, although frequently closely based on real events. I think this is we're not going to get it. This slide here we go. King Otto's Scepter is written in 1939, and it satirises the expansionist policies of Nazi Germany, especially the annexation of Austria, and even features a fascist dictator named Mustler, which is not a giant leap from certain fascist leaders of Germany and Italy that might be running around at the time. Whilst Mustler and his supporters are clearly on the side of evil, the side of good, and Tintin, are represented by the benign figure of a hereditary monarch. Now, over the course of the story, the character, personality and behaviour of Tintin also changes. Tintin comes from nowhere. There's no indication of where he came from, even whether he has parents. He's frequently described as a boy reporter, although this scene here is the only time he files any copy over all 24 of the books. Yet, despite being a boy reporter, he lives on his own in a house in Brussels. He drinks alcohol, he drives cars, he shoots guns. Herge himself actually said that Tintin's probably about 14 or 15 and ages about 4 years over the course of the books, which still doesn't really understand how he manages to keep up his house on Labrador Road, Brussels, without ever filing any copy. As well as having no family, Tintin appears to not have any friends, with the exception of his faithful dog Snowy, with whom he enjoys a telepathic connection. In the early stories, Snowy seems able at points to understand what the other's saying, despite the fact that to everybody else, Snowy is just barking. Now, as the books progress, Tintin makes a circle of friends. This coincides with the arrival of plots, of detailed backgrounds, and also the break of the telepathic connection with Snowy. While Snowy is still ready to leap to Tintin's rescue, Tintin no longer understands what he has to say. As soon as he meets human friends, Snowy must return to his place in the realm of the animals. Tintin's friends arrive. First he meets the Thompson twins, two near-identical detectives, and actually I don't have time, but basically Herge's dad and Herge's uncle look exactly like these people. It's amazing, it's astonishing. They are also twins. The Thompson twins have different surnames, so they're neither twins nor probably not brothers. Tintin's greatest friend, Captain Haddock, is the next to be introduced, who has such a personality that in fact in the later books he becomes the main character. He overwhelms Tintin. Haddock is also certainly, almost certainly, the best-loved functioning alcoholic in children's literature, rarely emerging into sobriety, and frequently putting his lives in danger through his ability to finish off a bottle of whiskey in a matter of minutes. But Tintin, not daunted, takes advantage of the captain's alcoholism to encourage him to take risks in a number of situations. As soon as the captain's suggesting something quite sensible, like turning back, Tintin just hands him a bottle of rum or whiskey, and the captain's ready to carry on the adventure. Hot on Haddock's tail is Professor Calculus here, and the only woman in the entire series who actually does anything or says anything, Bianca Castafiore. Tintin's world is a world of single men who show very little interest in romance. Now again, if we had more time, I've got a really long and complicated theory that actually Calculus and Castafiore are carrying on a very discreet relationship. Not only as soon as this scene happens, there's Calculus dashing off to Milan to see Castafiore straight again. It might be subtext, it might just be my imagination. I don't have time to talk about it, I'm afraid. But as Tintin's friends arrive, not only does he lose his telepathic connection with Snowy, but he also begins to lose his thirst for adventure. In the early books, Tintin actively sets off to far-off places in search of trouble and intrigue. And in the last few books, he actually just seems much happier to just stay in Marlinspike Hall or take gentle holidays with his friends. And it's only the fact that kidnappings, plane crashes and civil wars just happen to get in the way that we ever get any adventures at all. In the latter stage of Herge's life, he went to see a psychiatrist after having alarming recurring dreams of great empty white expanses. The psychiatrist claimed the dreams were rooted in Herge's writing and urged him to stop doing it. Instead, Herge left the psychiatrist and went on to write Tintin in Tibet, a book made almost entirely from great white expanses, and which the entire plot hinges on a dream that Tintin has. The worlds of Tintin and Herge become ever closer. Tintin in Tibet was Herge's favourite Tintin story. The poet A.F. Harold wrote recently that your favourite Tintin book is the one that you had when you were a child. I had two. I had Tintin in Tibet, which terrified me, not because of the great white expanses, but most because of the frankly alarming abominable snowman. And the Castafiore Emerald, which is still my favourite. It's also, in my opinion, the pinnacle of later stage Tintin, a Tintin who has found his friends and doesn't need to chase adventure anymore. The entire story is set in Marlinspike Hall, or in the very near surrounding area, and through an intricately woven set of false starts, red herrings, and endless repetitions, it tells a story without anything ever actually happening. It's a virtuoso piano solo of a book. Herge's characters are at this point so deftly sketched and their personalities so defined that the sheer fact of them interacting with each other is an adventure enough to carry the text. The writer Tom McCarthy advised any up-and-coming novelist to read this, Castafiore Emerald, as a masterclass in how to structure a novel, and I'd be inclined to agree with him. But we're talking here about Tintin's political transformation. In the opening page of the final story Herge finished before he died, Tintin the Picaros, we see Tintin, he's got a CND badge there on his motorcycle helmet, which is quite a leap from the commie-bashing imperial warrior we met in the earlier books. The story follows the standard late Tintin plot. Tintin and friends are trying to enjoy a quiet life at Marlinspike when something happens to thrust an adventure upon them. So in this case, Castafiore and the Thompsons have been captured by the South American dictator General Tapioca and accused of treason. And so they fly to the capital city of where he lives, San Theodoros, to sort things out. After a bit of running around, they agree to help the leader in exile, General Alcazar, to carry out a bloodless coup and topple Tapioca in order to save their friends. This object achieved, they get on the plane and fly back home. So here they are, flying into Tapioca's dictatorship in San Theodoros. Here's the final page of the final book, which sees our heroes flying out again over a shanty town, the same one they passed on the way in. The same guards walk about swinging truncheons. The only thing that has changed is the name of the dictator in charge. As they fly home, the professor is muttering about mustard. Tintin has gained his friends, and in the process of gaining his friends, he loses his thirst for adventure and his political drive. He's so estranged from politics at this point, he's prepared to cause a revolution in a country for the sole purpose of getting his 3 friends out of prison. Tintin goes from Soviets to somnambulance, from colonialism to condiments. And that's sort of the end. We're going to do questions in a moment, I think. There's a little, if you are really interested in this, sadly most Tintin scholarship is in French. But there are 2 fantastic books, one of which is called Tintin and the Secret of Literature by the writer Tom McCarthy, who's a Booker nominee but also really loves Tintin. And the other one has just been translated from French, and if you're into Freudian analysis of like Tintin's dreams in immense detail, that's called The Metamorphoses of Tintin by Jean-Marie Apostolides. But yes, that is the end. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much.
Excellent. So any Tintin, well, we established, yes, the question straight away over there, yes.
Yeah, just 2 things. One of which is how much do you think, or is known that Tintin is Herge of his own boyhood in some way? And second of all, is he the older Haddock? Was he a drinker? I mean, where did he pop up from?
Oh, well, that is interesting. I mean, as I mentioned briefly, the Thompsons are Herge's, certainly Herge's father and brother are based on them. Whether Tintin is Herge is interesting. Tom McCarthy's got a fascinating theory that Herge always believed his father was a lower middle class clerk in Brussels, and Herge always believed that he was descended from royalty. And Tom McCarthy reckons there's so Haddock has bequeathed Marlinspike Hall from his ancestor, Sir Francis Haddock. And above the doorway at Marlinspike Hall, there is what looks like the coat of arms of Louis XVIII. And this gets a bit lost in translation. It gets translated to Charles II in English, which isn't quite the same. But Louis XVIII, the habit was that you would bequeath a house to an illegitimate child, that you wouldn't be able to acknowledge them, but you would give them somewhere to live. So McCarthy's theory is that Haddock is the illegitimate child of Louis XVIII, and that, and similarly Herge has that same, he believed, or at least would have liked to have believed, that he was nobility. I don't know about the drinking. I think basically it's one of Herge's jokes that he falls back on. If he's looking for a good gag, it's either the captain gets drunk or Snowy gets drunk. And he pulls it off well throughout the course of a number of books, but it's basically the same joke in a number of other ways. I don't know if that really helps to answer. I don't know if Tintin really has a personality. I think he just runs around and does things.
Any other questions for Chris? And Tintin related or Asterix? Because you mentioned Asterix at the start. I think I was a bit of an Asterix.
I don't really know anything about Asterix. The translation of it into English is often greatly applauded because the puns apparently are better than the puns in French. Everybody's name in Asterix is a pun, and the dog is called Dogmatics, the druid is called Getafix, the town chief I think is called Vital Statistics. But the translators are often applauded for taking a cheap joke in French and making it into a slightly better cheap joke in English.
Excellent. Any other questions for Chris around Tintin and his projects. I can't.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Sorry, it's not
Yeah.
a question, but I think aside from the story and the politics of it, it does remain a fantastic, colourful art. And I think, as I remember, the pictures actually, because there's a lot of text in those which were quite complicated for younger children, but the pictures told the story as much as anything else. The art remains, I think, really the key attraction of it.
Yeah, no, the art is fantastic, and if you have a look at, you've got the figures and you've got the backgrounds. There was during the later years of Tintin, when it was becoming increasingly famous, there was a squabble between Herge, the person who created Tintin, and his studios, because Herge would draw the foreground, so he'd have drawn the son Theodore and the soldiers, but actually Studios Herge would be filling in the background. And they wanted the later books to be credited to Studios Herge, but Herge wasn't having any of it. But no, there are the artwork in the background, and in fact the story that Herge never finished, Tintin and Bavard, one of his illustrators went on and produced a unauthorized edition of it, and because he'd spent the last 7 or 8 years of his life drawing the backgrounds, he had Herge's style down so much to a T that he could create this bootleg. It was suppressed. You can find dodgy versions of it on the internet. They're sadly quite low resolution. But yeah, the sheer level of detail in the background of some of the images, it is astonishing. It's beautiful.
Any final questions for Chris? I've just got one, and then we'll take a break. I was talking to someone in the week, Chris, about the name of Tintin's dog, and you referenced Snowy. It definitely was Snowy. Do you know where Milo? There wasn't there a dog Milo Tintin? Have I made that up?
Milo, Milou is from Tintin Tibet, is what they call the Yeti. I believe maybe Milou, as in snowy, from the French, might well be what Snowy is called in France. That would be my guess. I sadly don't speak French, which means huge amounts of Tintin scholarship.
Oh, it is. It's been confirmed.
It has been confirmed.
It's
Thank
been
you.
confirmed. It's been
Yeah,
confirmed.
huge amounts of Tintin scholarship are denied me because I don't understand it. So I just have to wait for somebody to laboriously translate it. But yeah, Milou and it's the Migu is what they call the Yeti, which might be from Tibetan.
Well, we'll go with Miguel, we'll go with Milo. We've heard it here first, it's been confirmed at the Bavard, and it means the same. So, can we thank Chris for a wonderful talk?